So just before the video starts, I wanted to give a quick shout out to what is quite possibly the most apt sponsorship I've ever come across for Vivec. Oftentimes I'll decline, 99.9% of sponsorship deals I come across because I just don't think Raid Shadow Legends is very appropriate for the sort of content on this channel. But I know a lot of you like to fall asleep to these report videos, and that's why I thought these COZYSNUG sleep earbuds from LYTMI really are a match made in heaven for this channel and its viewers. If you're anything like me, you might struggle falling to sleep on your back with conventional earbuds in. I'd always wondered whether there were any designs that facilitated side sleeping without waking up with a perforated eardrum. Not only do these earbuds work wonders for side sleepers, they boast high quality audio, are super lightweight and soft with various different sizes of ear wings to pick and choose from, on top of having 21 hours of charge when using the charging case. So, now you can all quickly and smoothly fall asleep listening to me recount the usual litany of mind-bending, reality-shattering experiences that we all know and love. If you're interested, please check out the link in the description, and don't forget to use the discount code VIVEC for 10% off your order. Anyway, we'll crack on with the video now, but be sure to let me know what you thought of the earbuds if you do end up snatching yourself a pair, and thank you to LYTMI for reaching out, I really appreciate it.
Nuclear Nistridak, a 6-gram heroic dose of golden teachers, a trip report from the Vivec Discord. I first gave magic mushrooms a go in March of 2021, when I bought 5 grams of golden teacher mushrooms, doing a gram of them for my first time. The gram dose felt somewhat like being stoned, and while interesting in its own right, I decided to go deeper and see what I'd encounter, doing 2 grams for my next trip, which led to a very strange and yet fascinating day at the local mall. After experimenting with about 2 grams for a couple months and reading about heroic dose experiences, I decided I was ready to go to that level, a big mistake looking back now. In late May of that same year, I consumed 6 grams after work while at my house. It was hard to get them down, but I managed to accomplish what felt like a challenge at the time, and about 20 minutes into the trip, right when effects were taking hold, I decided it would be a good time to go for a walk. So, I left my house, headed toward a field I knew of that sat by a picturesque pond, and when I arrived at the pond, things were already starting to get rather intense. The sky seemed especially bright, and the grass swayed unnaturally in the wind. The sound of passing cars seemed enhanced in a strange and alien manner, and it felt like I could hear everything that was going on all at once, even faint noises in the background such as a dog barking. This cacophony of sound unnerved me, and I eventually decided to walk some more, ending up at a local grocery store in the area. As I approached the store, the parking lot flickered, and the pavement was a sea of movement and morphing, and upon entering the building, I found that the terrible wall of sound in there was worse than it had been outside. I did the only thing I could think of doing at the time, and made my way for the men's room at the back of the building, assuming that I would find some form of sanctuary within it. When I entered the men's room, the lights were turned off. Sparks seemed to fly in the corners of my eyes, and the walls vibrated with energy. Turning the light on, I made my way into the handicap stall and sat down, and here my experience reached its peak intensity. The toilet I was sitting on felt like it was only half a foot tall, too small to hold me. And yet when I looked at the floor, it felt as if I was miles up in the sky. The square floor tiles took on the appearance of farmland or rice paddies, as if you were seeing them from inside of a plane, and I quickly averted my gaze from the ground just beneath me, focusing on the wall instead. At this point my anxiety was at an all-time high, and it felt like I was losing my sanity as the room took on a strange and artificial appearance, as if I was inside of a video game. The floor began to shift colours, and the room shook as if an earthquake had struck the building. As I watched, the entire environment had become a strange funhouse reality that disturbed me greatly, and my vision began to glitch. At least, that's the best way I could describe it. One moment I was in this morphing and ever-changing public bathroom, and then for a brief second I was somewhere else. Another reality.
Another planet within this one? Across a great plain, I witnessed a very large behemoth looking directly at me from behind a hillside with fierce eyes. Within my brain, a strange word was spoken with a mechanical voice that resembled nothing I had ever heard before. Nucleonistridac. I believed this to be the name of the eldritch being that I gazed back upon. And just like that, I was returned to the bathroom. I began pacing the stall anxiously, concerned I would never be sober again and would be stuck like this forever. They would eventually find me in here going mad in the stall, and I would be committed to a mental hospital for the rest of my existence. I was convinced that this was the end for me in the worst way possible. My vision continued to glitch, and I would start to see planets. Some recognizable, such as Jupiter, others fully alien, their place in the galaxy unknown. I checked my phone and saw that it was 6:57 PM. Almost 2 hours had gone by since I consumed the 6-gram dose, and I still had 3 or 4 hours of this to go. I called up my best friend to tell him what was happening, and hopefully to get a ride from him home once the effects had subsided, and thankfully he actually picked up. I told him I was tripping very hard and struggling to maintain a sense of reality, and he reached with both fear and awe at what I had put myself through. As I spoke to him, the number 657 kept flashing through my brain in a thought loop that would last me the next hour and a half. The bathroom felt like it was floating in empty space, and I wondered if I opened the door, would I find the store or just a black void of sorts? I was fortunate that in my entire time within the bathroom, only one person actually walked in to use it. There was no way I could have interacted with anyone in person during this experience, and when talking to my best friend, my words were slurred and sometimes hard to get out. It was like trying to talk after having just learned a language, like some important part of my brain had been put into low power mode. Eventually, around 7:30 PM, the effects had lessened enough that I felt safe in leaving the bathroom. I wandered the store for a while, venturing down aisles with an adventurous spirit. It felt like being in a museum of basic modern American life, and I gazed upon each item with a curiosity unmatched. By about 9 PM, the trip had subsided to feeling like I was buzzed on alcohol or somewhat stoned, and my buddy picked me up from the building and took me back to my house. On the way back, I explained everything that had just happened to him, and told him that I felt lucky to be alive at this point. I'd felt so convinced I would never recover from this trip, and just knowing it was coming to a close felt like the biggest relief I had experienced and would ever get to experience. When I did arrive home, I went straight to bed after having dinner. I was worn out by the trip, like I'd just gone through the most intense exercise of my life. I've never attempted a heroic dose since this day, and I'm not sure that I really need to. Going beyond just how scared I was during my time in the bathroom, it felt to me like these were one of those once-in-a-lifetime moments that you're not supposed to redo. Since this day, I've kept my shrooms dosages rather conservative, doing only 1.5 to 2 grams of Golden Teacher. I've never tried 3 grams of it, specifically due to my fear of a possible repeat of what happened at 6, although in all likelihood, 3 grams would be less intense. How much less intense this would actually be though, is anyone's guess. The closest I've actually come to this trip since the day it happened was when I did Liberty Caps for the first time, at a dosage of 1.5 grams. And even that was still more manageable than my heroic dose of Golden Teachers, since I was able to walk around outside while in the Liberty Caps. I could not have remained outside during my Golden Teacher heroic dose, and I am glad that in spite of my altered state, I still had the sense to find somewhere to hide when I knew the peak was about to make its impact. My advice for anyone attempting a heroic dose for the first time would be to have a trip sitter present, and to please stay inside until the peak. No matter how you feel on the come up, assume nothing until 2 hours into your trip, because these mushrooms can hit you with a sneak attack if you aren't careful, and believe that you can handle anything. If I was to try a heroic dose again, I would definitely want to be in a secure location such as my home, somewhere that I cannot get myself into any deep shit. Regardless of the fear-inducing nature of the heroic dose, I still feel privileged to have experienced this strange afternoon, one that still feels like yesterday, even after 3 years. There is little out there that can compare to both the awe and the fear psychedelics can bestow upon us, and the new outlooks we can develop as a result in regards to life, the universe, and ourselves. And we're back, after an extended delay over the Christmas period. Hope you guys all had a fun time with your family and whatever you do over the holiday periods. So,
yeah, I've been actually moving and obviously spending time with family, going back home and yeah, just getting merry as you do. But I've just managed to, as of today, get a trip report out because I know people are satiating for it. I've had a lot of messages and I really appreciate the fact that people value this content so much and also have integrated it into, I'd say, probably the most significant aspect of the life would be getting to sleep. Obviously, I know a lot of people consume these videos just in terms of audio. So yeah, I hope you managed to find some alternative way of satiating your pre-sleep relaxation period. I'm sure you found a way in the end. We always do, don't we? So anyway, continuing on from the commentary sections from the other report, I thought I'd read out the psilocybin mushrooms entry on Psychonaut Wiki. Psilocybin mushrooms, also known as magic mushrooms, psychedelic mushrooms, and shrooms, are a family of psychoactive fungi that contain psilocybin, a psychedelic substance of the tryptamine class. How do you guys say fungi? Do you say fungi or fungi? I've always said fungi. Someone will probably tell me how wrong I was for saying that at first, as they usually do. I remember when I used to pronounce micrograms as a UG back in the day. I always used to say that just before I got into YouTube, and that really seemed to offend a lot of people. Obviously, from that point on, I said micrograms because, it's more professional, isn't it, at the end of the day? But it's just rather amusing, isn't it, how triggered some people get over pronunciations, although, yeah, this is the internet we're dealing with. Anyway, back to this. The mechanism of action is not fully known of psilocybin mushrooms, although binding activity at serotonin receptors is thought to be involved. Psilocybin mushrooms occur on all continents and have been taxonomically classified into over 200 species, the most potent of which belong to the genus Psilocybe. Again, do you call it psilocybe or psilocybe? Tomatoes, innit? Pretty much. Based on imagery found in prehistoric rock art, they are thought to have been used by various human cultures since before recorded history. After being introduced to the Western world in the 1950s, they generated substantial public interest. Along with LSD, they were incorporated into the youth counterculture movement of the 60s. Widespread usage of psychedelics provoked a societal backlash, and they were prohibited in 1970. Mr. Nixon, I believe, was the big proponent of outlawing psychedelics and the war on drugs in general. Interesting, isn't it, that if I could transport myself back to that time, feel the zeitgeist, what was going on, I guess the people who had never taken psychedelics and just lumped them in with other drugs and then heard of people having these nightmare trips and then on the other side having these transcendental experiences must have been deeply confused about what was actually going on with them. I guess the sheeple, if you want to call them, the people who were asleep, the most easy to control by the higher ups, the government, deep state, Illuminati, whatever you want to call it, whatever pulls the strings, whatever the higher levels of the hierarchy within society, obviously saw psychedelics for what they were. They knew exactly what was going on with them, and due to this knowledge, due to the knowledge of their powerful abilities to break you out of your paradigm of thought, your conditional thinking that you've been brainwashed with since you're literally born. Psychedelics are basically they're like the anti-venom to the venom that is mind control that the higher ups use to basically keep us in line and make sure the systems that they engineer to keep them in power maintain themselves. And psychedelics obviously were a massive threat to that and all of this counterculture stuff. So no wonder Mr. Nixon and Agnew decided that maybe psychedelics are not the one for maintaining the status quo and that they need to be stopped. But it can only be stopped for so long because, as we've seen in modern times, psychedelics are now coming back into the public consciousness. We're very much going through another revolutionary period. So no matter how much you want to prevent the truth from manifesting, prevent the truth of reality intercepting reality, these like chaos agents and people who want to maintain the chaotic nature of society, which funnily enough they think is maintaining order, it's only going to have this boomerang effect where it just comes back to bite them in the arse. You can only run away from truth for so long. this is hardwired into the fabric of reality and consciousness. So yeah, they were always going to come back, and in a sense, they were always going to get prohibited. So yeah, it sort of makes sense in the meta-narrative of the universe for the counterculture movement of the 60s not to succeed, quote unquote, in a sense, but in a sense it did succeed because it was always going to sow the seeds for psychedelic use in a more conscious manner across society later on down the line. So it really was, the spark that began the journey. So today, they are among the most widely used psychedelic substances, partly due to the ease of personal cultivation and harvesting. As a part of the so-called psychedelic renaissance, they are currently being investigated in the treatment of a number of ailments including anxiety, depression, addiction, and other mental disorders. Subjective effects include visual geometry, hallucinatory states, time distortion, enhanced introspection, conceptual thinking, euphoria, and ego loss. The intensity and duration of effects can vary greatly depending on factors such as species and batch, which can complicate standardized dosing information. They are often described to evoke entheogenic, mystical-like, or transpersonal experiences that may facilitate self-reflection and personal growth. In distinction to psychedelics like LSD, mescaline, 2CB, which may be described as stimulating, cerebral, and bright, psilocybin mushrooms are typically described as having an earthy, subliminal, or dreamlike quality. They also are reported to produce slightly more emotion enhancement, time distortion, and ego loss than the aforementioned substances, as well as more nausea, confusion, and sedation. Unlike most highly prohibited substances, psilocybin mushrooms have low abuse potential and are neither addictive nor physiologically toxic. However, adverse psychological reactions such as severe anxiety, paranoia, that's a new one, delusions, and psychosis are always possible, particularly among individuals predisposed to mental disorders. It is highly advised to use harm reduction practices if one is to use this substance. Couldn't agree more, to be fair. You need to use harm reduction practices in every single psychedelic foray that you embark upon. It just goes without saying, really. But just to comment on the actual writer's experience with psilocybin mushrooms, I think obviously they know that the method that they went about doing it at first was the best way to reduce harm. So you just take a light dose at first. Really, the amount of times I've said that the best way to go about using any psychedelic is that it's not a race, it's a slow and steady journey with the substance itself. Personally, for me, when I first started using mushrooms, I just managed to get them in these capsules, so there was 0.5 grams of cubensis in these capsules. I could only get cubensis, and with that certain strain, I just upped the dosage by 0.5 each time, so I had quite a few trips under my belt with mushrooms in general before I reached 4 grams. And by that time, I had enough experience under my belt and enough time had passed to integrate all the trips that when I did get to 4 grams, and I'm super sensitive to psychedelics, 4 grams for me probably feels like, 6 grams and beyond for another person. Whilst I must acknowledge that it was rather intense and reality distorting to the point of me basically being on the borderline of ego death, which I wasn't prepared for necessarily, the actual experience in the end was one of the most emotionally cathartic psychedelic trips I've ever had. And I've talked about this before. If you're a serious Vivec consumer, you might remember this from past reports where I've discussed that 4 gram mushroom trip actually completely shifted my diet and health routine into something much more stable. I mean, I've always been quite healthy, and I've never really engaged in eating junk food severely, but it really hammered home just how important health of the body is in regards to accelerating the quality of your consciousness. You can't really have clarity of mind without a healthy body because they have a symbiotic relationship. But it wasn't just because, I need to have higher levels of consciousness, I'm going to start eating. I just did it for the sake of doing it, because the sake of the goodness. And also I started to respect my body much more from literally the morning after I woke up. It was just right, okay. I now acknowledge just how important this actually is. And not only do I acknowledge the importance of it, I actually became passionate about healthy eating and exercising and taking care of the body to the best of my ability. I still have my own vices, as we all do. But anyway, massive props to the writer of this report for acknowledging the essential harm reduction practices of going up the dose in a slow and steady manner, which in essence is basically trying to ease you into these more deeply altered states of consciousness that become less and less human. So yeah, even on Psychonaut Wiki, warning, always start with lower doses due to differences between individual body weight, tolerance, metabolism and personal sensitivity. But obviously the writer understands here that where he went wrong, quote unquote, in a sense, is that he went from, say, like a strongish, like common strongish dose of golden teachers, which I've never taken before, so obviously there's going to be a massive difference between me and my psychedelic experiences with certain types of mushrooms. But regardless of strain, going from 2 to 3 grams, then up to 6, despite how confident you might be with your psychedelic experience with not just the shrooms already but other stuff under your belt, you are going to fall into that state of mind where you do assume that you can handle anything. And I completely get it, because I guess I've done it before. One of the times I remember was at this festival and I was like, okay, I'm just going to literally eat all these Liberty Caps without thinking of how much I'm actually taking, just literally grabbing handfuls and thinking, oh, it's going to be fine. And it was actually one of my worst / best trips in a sense. It was the most disgustingly painful trip on a physical level. But then, yeah, I did manage to actually let go during the final stages of it and achieving that sort of transcendental effect that we all know and love and are really aiming for. But yeah, with experiences like the one I'm reading here, whilst I guess in hindsight you would gain a lot of value from having gone through it, he also states that this is like a once in a lifetime sort of experience. And despite the intensity, despite the eventual integration, it may actually scare you off from higher doses for a very long time. So you really do have to be very careful with this sort of stuff. Just, like I say, gradually increase the dose until you get to a point where maybe you get to you're comfortable at just 4 grams and just experiment at 4 grams if that works for you. It's really quite relative and subjective. It just goes down to your individual experiences, and it's quite hard for someone else to tell you what you should do. I find this quite common on the Discord and on Reddit, where it's like, hi, I've got these amount of mushrooms, should I do this amount tonight? Should I do this with them? What sort of state should I be in? And I feel like we can only really help you out so much, whereas you need to actually tap into yourself and figure out what's best for you, because we aren't you. We have all of our different chemical, genetic makeups and conscious differences and egoic backlog that just can't be taken into account without directly being in your little bubble of perception. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this one, and it's good to be back on the scene. Let me know what you'd like me to cover in the future. What substance are you gagging for me to get trip reporting on? Anyway, let's wrap this up here, and I'll see you on the other side.